Is your battlefield looking a bit flat and boring? Have you been thinking about adding some ruins to it? Well, you've come to the right place. This is OTR Miniatures, I'm Tim, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make some simple ruins. I've made really simple ruins on the channel before, just using cardboard, and if you're a complete beginner to terrain making, you may want to check that out. I'll link that above. Let's get started, and I'll show you how I made these. The idea for these terrain pieces is from issue 6 of the Lord of the Rings Battle Games in Middle-earth magazine. So the first step is to cut out the walls, and we're going to be doing that out of some thick corrugated card. And I'm going to be doing the walls 4 inches long, as they're going to be on a 5-inch base, so you've got ½ inch either side for overlap. So now that we've got all of our pieces cut, for the next step we're going to be using a pencil, and all we're going to do is, starting from the top corner, just come along and just draw jagged lines down. So basically just stepping down, and it's ruins, so they don't have to be neat or equal amounts. You really are just coming down. So do that in whatever design you like. I'm going to cut mine out trying to stay as true to the magazine as possible. When you've finished your wall sections, you'll end up with something looking like this. And now we're ready to move on to the next step. The next step is making the base, and in the magazine they use cardboard for this, but to make it a bit more permanent, instead I'm going to be using this sheet of 3mm hardboard, and I'll be cutting that out into 5-inch squares just to begin with, but rounding the edges and getting rid of the corners on all of it. That is the 2 5x5-inch bases for the main ruins that we're going to be building in this video. And I've also cut out a 3x2-inch piece for a small single bit of ruined wall, and then a 3x3 base just for a rocky outcrop. So now what I'm going to do using the knife is just chamfer the edges of these. So as you can see, I've just thinned it down. I've left roughly 1mm, so about 1/3 of the thickness of it, just with a straight edge, just so you've got a bit more durability on there. And as I said, just using a knife, all you're doing is just removing material from it. You don't have to be really neat with this because ground isn't all neat, flat and perfect, so just go all the way around, get that done, and you'll end up with something looking like that, and then we can move on to the next stage. Now that we've got our finished bases and our finished walls, the next step is to join them together. So we're just going to be using PVA glue. We're just going to go along the bottom edge of both pieces, and then just one edge of one piece, and once that's done, you'll end up with your walls looking something like this, and then it's just a case of letting that PVA dry. That last step is easier the thicker the card you have, because then it will stand up on its own. So now we're on to the next step, where we're going to be using masking tape to cover all of the gaps in the edges of the cardboard there. So we're just going to cut bits to the right length, and simply go round the entire ruin, covering all the gaps like that. And on the back corners where the two walls are meeting, just put one strip all the way down. And once you've done that, you'll end up with something that looks like this. We're ready to move on to the next step. The next step is adding rubble to our ruins, which is done using old bits of sprues. So to get them, I'm just going to go and assemble these termagants, because I need some for my Tyrannid army. If you want to see a video of how I paint them, then let me know in the comments and I'll make that for you. Otherwise, just check them out on Instagram and TikTok. Now I've got a nice pile of sprue rubble that I can cut down to an appropriate size to use on each of these models. Once you've cut the rubble up to appropriate sizes for the model that you're working on, all you're going to do is, using PVA, just put a nice big dollop in the area that you want the rubble, and then simply drop it straight into that. And then
also to add a bit more texture to that, if you add a bit of sand or dirt, just sprinkle that straight in. Probably don't make that much mess when you're doing it, but I'm trying to get it on camera at the same time. Knock off the excess and you'll end up with a nice rubble pile looking like that. Now that I've perfectly demonstrated how to make a mess, when you do it, be smart and do it over a piece of paper so that anything that is spilt you can just easily pour straight back into your container. So these are all complete now. All we've got to do is wait for the PVA to dry and then we can move on to the next step. For the next step we'll be using some all-purpose ready mixed filler, and also I've got this new camera holder arm, so we should be able to improve the angles. This step is to add some texture and also some more durability to the walls. Now there's a couple of ways in which you can apply the filler. It's ready mixed, so you can do it straight from the pot. You can do this by using a piece of card. All you're doing, getting some filler on there, grabbing the piece that you're putting it onto, and simply just smearing it on. It doesn't have to be amazingly neat because, as I said, we're adding texture. So you can just go all over the piece, get it all covered, and then leave it to dry. The other way in which you can do this is using a old paintbrush. Grab yourself a plastic pot, because we're going to need to thin down the filler so that we can actually use the brush to paint it on. So just put some plaster in the tub, add some water to it, and mix that up until you've got a nice thick paste consistency that's going to be able to spread on well but hold its shape. And again, just grab the piece you're working on, slap it on. Again, we're not worrying about being neat because we're adding stone texture to it. Now, using the brush method is easier for the thickness of card that I've got. If you've got a thicker card, then just use the piece of card to spread it on and you'll get some really good results. Once it's all covered, you can see here I've got it slightly too wet, so it's actually still running down. You want it thick enough so that it won't run down. So I'll thicken my paste up and then cover the whole thing. At the same time as doing the walls, you can come in and just cover the base of it. I found that for best results, it's good to use a combination of the two techniques. So for your larger, flatter walls, just use the piece of card, put it all over, and then come back with a wet brush, and then you can smooth it all out and then add your texture. Once you're happy with the results, leave it to dry overnight, and then we can come back and continue with the next step. It is now the following day, and these are fully dried, and they are now rock hard. So we're ready to move on to the next step. The next step I'm going to do is optional, but it will add durability to the pieces. What I'm going to do is, using a suitable container, I'm going to mix up a roughly 50-50 mix of PVA glue and water, and then I'm going to add some acrylic paint to that. I'd normally use black, but I haven't got any, so I've got some cheap dark brown, which is perfectly fine for this. It's stone and natural, it's going to have brown tones in it anyway. Now we've got that mixed up, all we're going to do is take a large brush, simply paint it all over the models. Having the PVA glue in the mix also serves another purpose, as it helps to seal the pieces, meaning that in the next stages we won't have to be using as much paint to cover them. As soon as they are fully dry, then we're ready to move on to the painting. The first step of which is going to be to deal with these bits of plastic sprue rubble. So I'm guessing if, like me, you're making tabletop scatter terrain, then you've got a set of paint specific for painting miniatures. Use these, as they'll cover the plastic much better. So I'm just going to give them an undercoat of black, and then you can either use the brown straight over that undercoat or whatever colour you decided to use. With that done, we have effectively primed the pieces, so now we're ready to paint them. And in order to do that, I'm going to take the dark brown that I started with. If you started with black, then just add white to it. I'm just going to go with this light grey, mix that roughly 50-50 or 1-to-1 ratio, and I've ended up with this nice earthy grey tone. So I'm just going to cover the entire pieces with this and leave it to dry. So next up, we're going to grab the grey on its own. So if you've started off with black and added white to it to make your grey that you've done on this step, just add more white so it's a nice light grey. And we are going to dry brush these. So nice dry brush. I've actually used a hairdryer to get this one fully dry, as it's the one I've been using. Load some paint up on the brush. You don't need a massive amount here because we're going to be wiping most of it off anyway. So a bit of kitchen roll, go all over that, get the majority of the paint off of the brush, and then this is where the texture of the piece is going to come into its own. Just lightly dry brush all over it, picking out the raised edges, so you can already see the difference between the side I've dry brushed and the bit I haven't, and now that is actually reading as grey, which is what we want. So continue over all of it and you'll end up with something that looks like this. I even painted a rock to look like a rock. So if you're happy with the look of it at this stage, then that is the stonework completed. Otherwise, if you want it to go slightly lighter, just add a bit of white to whatever you just used to dry brush, and then just pick up the highlights, maybe just the tops of the stones, bits like that. Then all we're going to do now is finish off the bases, and to do that I'm going to start with a mid brown just to go around and tidy up the edge of it. Use whatever colour is going to work with your minis. So for mine, I paint the rims of my bases for my Middle-earth figures brown. That's why I'm using a brown. If you paint yours black or green, you could always use them colours. The main reason for doing this is so that when we apply the base material, if there's any gaps in it, then all that's showing through is that colour and it'll still look good. In order to do the basing on this, I'm going to use the same as I do for my Middle-earth figures, and that is Army Painter Brown Battleground and Army Painter Battlefield Grass Green. As soon as the PVA glue has dried, then they are complete and you're ready to put them on your battlefield. I think you'll agree that vastly improves the look of our battlefield. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see this battlefield in action, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and watch the next playthrough in Battle Games in Middle-earth series. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.